#1 competency for a sports team captain, far and away, motivating. Because think about it. I mean, think about the track captain. They have to motivate people to run around a rubber track. I mean, that's not inherently motivating, right? I mean, some people like to do it, but gosh, in order to do it faster than everybody, you have to be highly motivated. When we had the parachute team instructors do that same list of leader competencies, motivating was second from the bottom of a list of 9. It was not even on their scope. And so we had to dig into that. We looked into all the interview data, and we did some re-interviews, and what we found was dangerous places or crises are inherently motivating. People are already spun up. They don't need a cheerleader. You know, they need a quiet professional. They need a quiet professional. They need someone who brings the room down. And that's very different than the type of motivational leadership that we often see in sales organizations or in businesses, which works good when there isn't a crisis. But when people are spun up because they're afraid, the last thing they need is a yeller and a screamer. They need a quiet person who doesn't get excited. One of the things that's important to understand in crisis and in other aspects of leadership is that while leaders, like the folks in the back row here, while they're busy trying to run the show and they're deeply invested in the mission, many of the people who work for you, they just want to get home. They just want a paycheck, they want to take care of their families, and they want to get home. And it's the same with line workers in factories, and that perspective heightens in a crisis. And in a crisis, oftentimes the leaders are really focused on the mission and getting everything done, and they think all these people behind them are kind of the same way, but that's not what happens. People go back to the basics. First of all, the best way to stay alive in a dangerous environment and the best way to understand a crisis is to focus outward, like Danny Brown. Because these cadets would be standing at 10,000 feet on the skid of a helicopter holding onto a seatbelt that they didn't even use and checking somebody else's gear and then telling them to go. And that's the kind of thing where you can look down and that can become disconcerting to you. But if you are focused on what you're doing, if you're focused outward, it's not a problem. And as it turns out, that's neuropsychological. When we feel fear, it's in this brain structure right here called the amygdala. When we feel angry, we want to fight, we feel fearful, that's the brain structure that's electrically activated. When you task focus, you begin to activate your prefrontal cortex, which is up here. And it's very difficult to do both at the same time. And some of you may have already experienced this. Maybe you were in a car accident and you had to do something. You were definitely disoriented, but you focused outward, you did what you had to do, and you were pretty functional. And then you went and you sat by the side of the road on a curb, and that's when you start to shake. Not when you're doing it, but afterwards. That's because when you're doing it, you're in your prefrontal cortex, you're focused. When you stop doing it, you go right back into the deep, dark recesses of that amygdala, and it says, flee. It says you're afraid. So in teaching skydivers, and I've been an instructor for 14 years. I mean, I've taken thousands of people out of airplanes. When you want to keep yourselves or your soldiers calm, don't tell them to control their emotions, because when you do that, you focus inward and it just makes it worse. Tell them to focus, and better yet, give them a task. Give them something to focus on, even if it doesn't really contribute. But if they know that they've got a mission, they've got something to do, it's so much easier. And it's the same thing with financial analysts that are staring at 3 screens. You know, if you tell them they've got to do something and focus them in the middle of something that's going wrong, they'll function much better. One of the things you need to remember about junior level leaders is that the propensity and the expectation is there for you to set aside rules when you know they're not the right thing to do, or where you think in your mind as a leader that you can make it happen the right way at your level. Ethics is about rules, but morality is about doing the right thing. And so consequently, you may be called on at some time as a leader in a crisis to respond to pressure by setting aside managerial policy. And by doing that, you risk your job. You risk everything. But you'll do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And in the context of business, the thing to remember is when that business comes under pressure, there are people at a lot of different levels that will feel compelled to set aside managerial policy. And they're going to do it without asking you if you're the CEO. So you have to do work up front with these people. You have to do work up front to make sure that when they do that, when they make those kinds of decisions, that they're thinking just the way you do. And it comes in terms of giving them your intent rather than just rules. But, you know, sort of what's the intent behind what you're doing? And it comes with developing trust with them over time. But don't think, even in a high compliance organization like investment banking, that people are going to follow the rules when there's a big crisis, because they will feel compelled to do what they think is the right thing to do for the company and for themselves.